Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, may I extend a warm welcome to Ambassador Duarte and all the participants on behalf of CII to this webinar. This webinar initiative is a new one. It was launched in the year 2009 and we have had about 95 online sessions so far with about 6,000 members of the CII being covered. But the main focus of today's webinar is the India-Brazil business relations. Brazil is the largest economy in South America with a GDP of about 2.3 trillion US dollars. Agriculture is a major sector of the Brazilian economy and is key for economic growth and foreign exchange. Agriculture accounts for about 6% of GDP and 36% of Brazil's exports. Brazilian industry accounts for about 22% of the GDP, while the services sector accounts for about 66%. Brazil has one of the most advanced industrial sectors in Latin America, accounting for roughly 1/3 of the GDP. Brazil's diverse industries include automobiles and parts, machinery and equipment, textiles, shoes, cement, computers, aircrafts, and consumer durables. Brazil continues to be a major world supplier of commodities and natural resources. With significant operations in lumber, iron ore, tin, other minerals, and petrochemicals, Brazil has a diverse and sophisticated services industry as well, which includes telecommunications, banking, energy, commerce, and the computing sectors. In the last few years, there has been tremendous increase in the trade between India and Brazil. We have also seen the FDI flows from Brazil to India and how they have recorded an increase. However, it is still too small given the size of the Brazilian economy. Huge investment potential exists in sectors such as the agribusiness, chemicals, energy, oil and gas, mining and minerals, pharmaceuticals and healthcare, IT, and BPO. At the same time, challenges do remain. In today's webinar, Ambassador Duarte will touch upon the opportunities that exist for Indian businesses in Brazil and also try to address the issues and challenges that have been faced by Indians while doing business with Brazil. Before I hand over the floor to Ambassador Duarte, I would like to give you a brief introduction. His Excellency Carlos Sergio Sobral Duarte is the current ambassador of the Federative Republic of Brazil to India. Prior to this, he has held various positions in the government of Brazil as the Director of the Department of International Organizations, Ministry of External Relations, Brasilia, between 2007 and 2011, Minister Counselor, Permanent Mission of Brazil to the United Nations, New York, between the year 2004 and 2007, Head of the United Nations Division, Military of External Affairs, Brasilia, between 2003-2004, Advisor to the Minister of External Relations of Brazil in Brasilia, 2001 to 2002, amongst others. He is also a published writer. The most recent publication being a publication which in English is called, is translated as Towards a World Free from Weapons of Mass Destruction, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. O Brasil e ONU, Fundação Alexandre de Gisbao, 2008. He was also the recipient of various awards as the Tamandiri Merit Order by the Brazilian Navy, Air Force Merit Order by the Brazilian Air Force, Rio Branco Order by the Brazilian Ministry of External Relations, to name a few. May I request all participants to make a note that this webinar would be a one-way communication from CII headquarters, New Delhi. The live interactive session would begin after the presentation by His Excellency Ambassador Duarte. Participants are requested to type their questions in the question box, which would be opened during the Q&A session, and His Excellency Ambassador Duarte would take them up live one by one and would answer all the questions raised. May I, on behalf of participants, extend a formal welcome to His Excellency Carlos Sergio Sobral Duarte and invite him to take over the session. Over to you, Ambassador Duarte.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay Singh, and let me also thank CII for this opportunity to participate in this webinar and to give me an opportunity to make a presentation on Brazil, and more particularly on Brazil-India, the business potential that exists between the two countries and how to overcome some of the challenges that also are before us. I would begin with a reference to the state of the Brazilian economy. The Brazilian economy shows today a scenario of macroeconomic stability and of the expansion of the domestic market. Despite a recent slowdown, the fundamentals for continuing inclusive growth remain solid, and those are increasing rate of employment, an expansion of credit, decreasing real interest rates, inflation under control, a positive trade balance, a decreasing fiscal deficit, and last but not least, social policies that have been successful in tackling inequality and in helping to raise and consolidate internal purchasing power in the country. Now, this is shown in the various transparencies in a very clear fashion. First, the Brazilian GDP, which, as you pointed out, today reaches 2.5 trillion US dollars, makes Brazil currently the sixth largest economy, according to the IMF. And since 2007, what we see is a sustained average growth of over 4.5% per annum. Now, of course, compared to Indian numbers, this may sound modest, but the continuity of this growth is important, and as far as we can project over the coming years, this average over 4.5% per annum should be maintained. So we're looking at a positive outlook, particularly if we compare these numbers with the state of the overall global economy. Now, another indicator which I pointed out at the beginning, and here perhaps can be seen more clearly, is the rate of unemployment that has been steadily declining. And this we have numbers from 2005, so roughly for the last 6-7 years, we see Brazil there in the yellow line steadily declining and reaching currently 5.7%. Now, this is comparable to what we see in the USA or in the Eurozone of currently much higher rates. So this indicator of 5.7% unemployment in the Brazilian economy reflects actually a state of almost full employment in the economy. This is also reflected in terms of job creation, steady rates of growth despite periods of world economic instability over the past few years. We have there in this chart the millions of jobs that compose the Brazilian workforce, 24 million, and how many million jobs have been created over the years, each year. And there also we see a positive trend. The numbers for 2012 are not finished yet. We see there, despite some fluctuations, which of course amount to the pressures that the Brazilian economy has been subjected to because of world conditions over the years, but despite that, we see also very strong numbers in terms of the job creation, of the yearly job creation in Brazil. Now, these increasing rates of employment that we saw, they have been leading to more access to credit, which is, in a way, empowering the Brazilian consumer classes to be able to have more access to goods and services. Again, there we see a positive trend, currently almost 50% as a percentage of GDP, a total amount of credit that goes to roughly 2.2 billion reais. It's the Brazilian currency, and it's easy to arrive at a US dollar, because at the current exchange rate, we just have to divide it by 2. So that last column, which goes up to March 2012, we see that roughly 50% of Brazilian GDP is actually credit that's being made available. Another important indicator, which is inflation, has reached 6.5% in 2011, in a way as a reflection of the very high growth that Brazil did show in 2010, but it is in a declining trend in 2012, and the number that is expected for this year is 5%. So we also see a controlled rate of inflation, and one that should not exceed 5% in 2012. Another indicator which is important is the declining ratio of public debt relative to GDP, owing to a tight fiscal policy that has been followed by the country again over the years. And there we also see a trend that currently puts Brazil in around 35% of GDP in net public debt. Now that is also quite an achievement, considering the very high numbers that we see a decade ago, almost twice what it was currently. So the solidity of this number is really important. And this has been partly responsible for the space, a greater room that is available for interest rates to come down. And we've also seen that trend in Brazil. And there we have in the orange line the actual exchange rate of around 8.5%, has gone down since this chart was elaborated. It's now around 8%. And this gives a real interest rate, when you discount for inflation, around 2.14%. So again, there the actual rates of course are important, but what is also significant is the steady decline that we can observe there, again roughly in the last 10 years. Another important indicator is the external sector, and there we see a positive trade balance as again a steady number there of exports being superior to imports in Brazil, and also some fluctuation owing of course to the external constraints and stimuli that the Brazilian economy can receive. But we have there for 2011 a surplus of around $29.8 billion. So we see from a total trade amount of between 200 and 250 billion US dollars, we see there this surplus being generated, as it has been over the years. So again, we see a generation, a consistent generation of trade surpluses. Then, as partly also a reflection of this, Brazil has been improving its position on international reserves, and we see there up to 2004, Brazil still relied on loans from the IMF as for making part of those reserves. Since then, this has not been necessary anymore, but we see again from 2005 a steady increase up to now 351.9 billion US dollars for 2011. So again, that puts the country in a position that will allows it to be more resilient to the fluctuations in the world economy. And there we see another chart, this one with regard to the reduction of the population living in extreme poverty. This, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is a very significant development that we have seen in Brazil, again, over the years, but with a very important direction being taken from, let's say, to the beginning of the years 2000. Because we see that since then, around 2002, 2003, to today, we have had almost a 50% reduction in the number of people living in extreme poverty. And again, this is a trend that comes from further back over the years. And in this chart we have since 1992, so we have a 20-year period, and we see that in 1992 we had 35% of what's called in Brazil the E class, the population living in extreme poverty. Now this has been reduced in the space of 20 years to 12.8% currently. And the social policies that have been put in place in Brazil envisage a further reduction and an eventual elimination of people living in extreme poverty. So this is significant, not just for its social impact in the country, but also in terms of the increase in purchasing power that this represents for an important part of the Brazilian population. We see there another way of looking at this reduction in extreme poverty, which is the Gini coefficient and the level of inequality in Brazil. It's a very unequal country, still is, but it's becoming less so. And we see that in the Gini coefficient going down. Again, if we look over the past decade, we see that it has very significantly gone down, and is just another way of looking at the chart we previously showed. Now, the impact of this in terms of purchasing power can be seen in this chart, which is a significant reduction of poverty and the expansion of the Brazilian middle class, which are the A, B, and C classes, which are shown on this chart in red, green, and yellow. So we see there an increase in all of them, both in the higher income brackets in red, in the middle income brackets C, and the lower income brackets D, and then below the poverty line, steadily decreasing, and these upper three classes all showing important increases. So this, again, the Brazilian population is currently around 190 million. So we have more or less an idea of how much this represents in terms of new consumers coming into the market every year and giving more resilience to the Brazilian economy, in as much as it strengthens the internal market. I think these considerations on the Brazilian economy are important for everyone to have a clear view on where Brazil stands today in terms of its economy and particularly the fundamentals of the Brazilian economy. But it is also important in the context of exploring the business potential and overcoming the challenges between Brazil and India to have it clear that Brazil and India enjoy not just a growing relationship but also a strategic partnership. And this picture there of President Dilma Rousseff and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, which was taken during the last BRICS meeting in March this year in New Delhi, which in the case of President Dilma was also followed by a state visit that she made to this country. This picture shows the type of relationship that Brazil and India currently enjoy. We have excellent political relations. They are countries, both big developing countries with similar situations in many respects, countries that intend to play a more important role in world affairs, countries that have a very significant impact, not just on many global issues, but also in their own regions, and countries that stand to gain a lot, not just in terms of their potential for greater trade and investment, but also in terms of their potential for even greater cooperation. So let's now examine some of the particulars of the Brazilian-India relationship. And speaking specifically in terms of trade, bilateral trade shows a very important increase over the past 10 years. And this graph, I believe, illustrates this very clearly. We have gone from a trade that in the beginning of the 2000 decade did not even reach $1 billion to the current number, which is $9.3 US. This was the closing number for 2011. So we see there that the trade between the two countries really has soared in the past 10 years. And this in itself is important because it shows that the two countries do have a lot of complementarities and a lot of possibilities, but this can be still greater than it is today. This steady growth in the bilateral trade, it is not a, let's say, although we have seen a linear growth in the trade between the two countries, but it has also shown some fluctuations. And we see there that the red line, which corresponds to the Brazilian imports from India, they have grown perhaps more steeply than the Indian imports from Brazil. And we see these two lines as being, over the past 2 or 3 years, growing more divergent. So this means that the Brazilian deficit vis-a-vis India has been on the increase. So these are just, let's say, some imbalances that exist in our current trade. Partly, this has to do with the actual concentration of this trade on certain products. And when we look at the main Brazilian exports to India, we see that most of it is composed, a little bit over half, of crude oil. And the imports from India again, slightly over 50% of diesel fuel. So this very high concentration on fuels, I mean crude oil and diesel fuel, makes this trade vulnerable to certain fluctuations, not just in price, but also in terms of if there is a change in this, it will impact much more significantly on the overall volume of trade. Other Brazilian exports to India are copper sulfate, soybean oil, sugar, and Brazilian imports from India, pharmaceuticals, coal, textiles, and yarn. In general, we can observe that the exports from India to Brazil are slightly more value-added products than the products from Brazil to India, which are more, let's say, raw materials. Total trade, as I had commented, has reached to 9.3 billion in 2011. There was a target that was set during the President Dilma Rousseff's state visit to India in March of reaching 15 billion by 2015. This target was recently reiterated by Trade Minister Sharma's visit to Brazil in June. So we have seen, like I said, a very big increase in the past decade. We still see room for further increases. Whether 15 billion by 2015 is conservative or not, we'll find out over the years. But I have been advised that the preliminary numbers for 2012 already show a continuing expansion in the trade between Brazil and India. Another important element of the relationship between India and Brazil has been a trend towards more investments, both by Indian firms in Brazil and also by Brazilian firms in India. The existing investments by India or Indian companies in Brazil include sugar and ethanol, and there we have the largest single investment of almost $500 million value of liquid sugars in Brazil. Information technology, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, and aluminium. Those are, let's say, the largest areas where we see investments by Indian companies in Brazil. And potential interest in mining, in oil and gas, big opportunities there, and we'll come back to those areas. Infrastructure, hospitality, tourism, hotel, and the automotive industry in Brazil. All of these are potential areas of further investment that could come from this country to Brazil. Brazilian companies in India, some of them are also already here. The major joint ventures that exist are Marco Polo Tata in the automotive sector, Gerdau, which is a steel maker in Kalyani, Petrobras and ONGC on oil and gas, PLE, TCI on engineering. There's a big demand in Brazil for engineers over the years. We can project that, and this country has a large base and a full education system that produces a lot of engineers, so we see complementarity there as well. Brazilian companies that are installed in India, the WEG makes heavy electrical equipment, Vulcabras, shoes, Stefanini, information technology, and Perto, automatic teller machines. There are some offices here too of Andrade Gutierrez, which is a big Brazilian construction company, and Vale, which is also a large mining company from Brazil. So we see a lot of interest also on the part of Brazilian companies to invest in India, both in joint ventures or in their own installations here, and we believe that this is a growing trend. Investment opportunities in Brazil. Brazil is today a country that offers opportunities in many areas. It is a country with plenty of growth potential. We have seen the sound macroeconomic fundamentals that characterize the Brazilian economy today. Some of those sectors have already benefited from the Growth Acceleration Program, which is a federal government program whose first phase was from 2007 to 2010 and has reached $373 billion US. This public and private investments, and the same program has a second phase which has already begun, and the preliminary investment forecast for the second phase, which is called PAC2, is shown in the chart there. In those three main areas: logistics, power generation and transmission, and social and urban. And this we have until 2014 total investment forecast of $542 billion US, 358.8 after 2014, to a total in this second phase of the Growth Acceleration Program, $900 billion US. So we see there that these are very significant numbers. Of course, it's a big country. It has many different areas that need to be invested. A lot of it goes, as is shown there, in logistics, power generation, social and urban. So a lot of infrastructure projects need to be financed. There we see in this chart, in this cube there, the main investment areas that exist in Brazil. We have selected some sectors there, not all, of course, but that are expected to receive significant investments in the coming years. And there we have estimates in billion US. From the bottom up, from 2012 to 2015, the main one is oil and gas. I guess most people are aware of the fact that very important oil discoveries have been made offshore in Brazil in a deep seabed reserves, and this will require a significant amount of investment, estimated at $177 billion US over the next 3 to 4 years. The next one, again from the bottom up, is mining. That's another major area in Brazil. Automotive, pulp and paper, electronics, chemicals, steel, textiles, and in other areas, $9 billion. So we see there a breakdown of almost $300 million per sectors that will certainly attract investments from overseas. So we see there many opportunities in several major sectors that will interest important companies from the world over, and certainly from this country too. Two major events that are coming up in Brazil and which will also, we believe, contribute to this investment which will be made both by the government and by the private sector in many areas in Brazil. Those two events are the Football World Cup in 2014 and the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro in 2016. So we have there two major world sporting events coming up in Brazil, which will help to remain, to keep the focus on Brazil, and also on the need to update its infrastructure in many areas. So we see there that these major events, of course, require investment in transports, ports, airports, urban mobility, subways, trains, highway corridors, hospitality, and tourism. All of those areas where we have expertise in this country. Co-investment needed in the 12 Brazilian cities that will host the World Cup is estimated at $11.3 billion, both public and private. And the core investment for the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, around 15.8, 16 billion US dollars. So we also have those figures which we find are important to share with you. So overall, what I have tried to do here is to give a picture of the Brazilian economy, the way it stands today, what are the main characteristics of the Brazilian economy now, and the relationship that Brazil has with India. It is a full relationship in all areas. I have here concentrated more on the trade and investment part of that, and also some highlights of the investment opportunities that exist in Brazil today. So I have come to the end of this presentation and ready to continue our interaction here. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Excellency. That was a very well structured and a very comprehensive presentation on Brazil. Based on the presentation, we have a few questions for you, at the end of which we will open the floor to all the viewers, and who can then ask their questions through the question box, and we will give a reply from here. The first question, Excellency, is on the India LAC trade and investment relations. You said that both India and Brazil see huge potential of bilateral cooperation in the areas of trade and investment. And Brazil happens to be the major trading partner of India in this region. Both countries have taken initiatives also in the recent years, but still India and Brazil trade is a mere 8 billion US dollars. Given the big size of the market in both these countries, these figures are very, very paltry and do not really justify the huge potential which exists. What are the key hurdles, according to you, in enhancing the bilateral trade and investments between the two regions? Is it geographic and cultural, or is it distance, or something else?
I think the main challenge that is before us today in increasing trade between India and Brazil is really to diversify the trade that we have without prejudice of increasing the trade in the areas that we already have a strong relationship. The real challenge is to diversify, and we have to see that in perspective, because although this trade has grown very significantly, it can still grow further. And the fact that we have very strong trade relations, for example, with other countries in the region, such as China or South Korea, and means that distance may be a factor, but it's not a determining factor in making a real, true hindrance to the growth of trade. Neither does, in my view, cultural issues. On the contrary, it seems that culturally, both countries have a lot to gain from learning more about each other. These are two countries, Brazil and India, that for various reasons, for many years, were mainly connected to the big economic centers of the world, and had little contact between themselves. This contact is being developed in the past few years. It has already yielded very important growth in the trade between the two countries over the past 10 years. We have no reason to expect that it will be different in the next coming years. The challenge really is not only to increase the trade, but to diversify it and to increase the presence of Indian companies in Brazil and Brazilian companies in India.
Thank you. In your presentation, Excellency, you mentioned complementarities. India and Brazil can complement each other very well, you said. While Brazil has strong interest in agricultural exports, India has emerged as a major power in the services trade. India is a major importer and consumer of the types of primary products of which Brazil is a major producer. India offers sizable markets for Brazil's agricultural products. Similarly, India can help in the areas of innovation and skill development, particularly which is IT related. How can this potential be realized? Will the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement help SICA, or industry, as we know, India, as we know, is already in the process of signing several trade agreements. But with Brazil, only a shallow agreement exists, the India-Mercosur PTA. How do you see the future?
Well, I see the future as being much more diversified and with a much greater volume of trade than it is today. And this is because complementarities do exist, which so far have been virtually untapped. And Brazil is a very big agricultural country, as you mentioned, and but it's only exports a few a few products out of that production to India, like soybean oil, sometimes sugar, depending on the sugarcane harvest in this country, and this means that it can export a lot more to this country in many areas of agricultural products, depending, of course, on whether we can reach agreement on lowering certain barriers that exist here for these products, also on certain distribution aspects of certain products, for example, chicken meat, reaching the public. And the same is true for India, because India is also an important agricultural country. And for example, in terms of certain products that maybe we wouldn't even normally associate with India, but for example, in buffalo meat, we also have a market that can open up in Brazil. So we have here potentialities both ways. And I'm just talking about the agricultural sector. Now, as you know, Brazil is also an important producer today, manufacturer of certain high technology products, for example, airplanes. And here again, we see a big potential market in India, because India has a need for regional air connections, which is precisely the type of airplane, of passenger airplane, that Embraer manufactures. So we see there another potentiality that could, in the case of that, in this case, aggregate value in the product that we would sell. We see that, for example, already in defense products, where some of the Embraer planes have been sold to the Indian government, and also some in a specific type of defense cooperation that we have with India. But this could extend to the civil area. And the same is true for India. India is also a country that has very developed industry in certain areas. Pharma industry, for example, it's already there, but this could increase much more. And we see other sectors where India does have not just expertise, but also actual manpower. For example, in engineering, where we already have seen the need in Brazil for engineers and the output of this country of this type of professional. And so we see many complementarities in various areas where trade can increase. Now, yes, I think that in terms of the agreements that exist, they can be perfected. I think that when President Dilma was here, an indication was made in this respect at the highest level by herself and Prime Minister Singh, and this can be further. The Mercosur agreement can be further expanded because it does cover a limited number of products today. Thank you.
The whole world has acknowledged something, and that is that Brazil and India weathered the recent world economic crisis with unprecedented resilience and emerged from it more quickly and robustly than the developed economies. This makes the developed world, they have urged a greater role for both India and Brazil in the future. In the wake of this change scenario, what kind of strategic thinking do you think is going on in Brazil to reposition itself in the world economy?
Well, I think Brazil, as a part of its strategy, is really to have sound economic fundamentals, and this it clearly has today. And it does have a big advantage today also in terms of its very large domestic market. Now, I believe that these two elements are also true of India. And we have today countries that have been able to not just withstand the effects of the global crisis and slowdown, but actually manage to continue growing in that scenario. Now, this is a result mainly of sound economic policies and a strong domestic market. And this is true of Brazil. We have, I think, developed our internal market. We will continue to do so. This will continue to cushion, in a way, Brazil from the external effects of the world economic situation, and the fact that India sort of shares many of these elements augurs very well for the increased cooperation and trade and investments between the two countries. These are two large countries, large developing countries that have been able to not only develop their own internal markets, but also many competitive industries, and they stand to gain from continuing their relationship.
Excellency, I have a few more questions of my own, but I will restrict myself to only one more, because we realize that we have a very vibrant viewership who have raised a number of questions. So I will just ask you a very short question, and then we will go on to the viewers. My question is about the South-South cooperation, which is a new concept, and it actually flows out of what you have just answered, and that is that on the back of the recent global economic events, the emergence of India and Brazil in the global economic governance process, there has been increased emphasis on South-South cooperation and linkages. How can we foster this South-South cooperation and economic linkage further?
Well, South-South cooperation has been going on for some time now, but it has been, I think, also increased in recent years, not just because the worldwide configuration has changed, but because certain big developing countries like Brazil and India and others have a lot more to share between themselves, and they have been able to do so in a more consistent way. Now, the world economic situation has also permitted certain new configurations to emerge, such as the G20 in the economic area, BASIC in the environmental area, G4 to reform the United Nations Security Council and other international governance institutions. All these developments are really open up new avenues for cooperation between our countries. But certain groups, such as BRICS, for instance, or IBSA, more particularly when we talk about South-South cooperation, are very significant. And IBSA, Brazil, India, and South Africa, have not just been able to increase their cooperation base in terms of the issues they cooperate on, but also to extend that cooperation to other developing countries. And this stems directly from the fact that these countries have already been able to devise their own solutions to development problems. And these solutions are very relevant for other developing countries and amongst themselves. So this is one area in which we do see a lot of further potential for them to cooperate. For instance, we see the Brazilian success in reducing income inequalities. This was done in the case of Brazil mainly through a cash transfer program. Now, we are ready to share this experience with other developing countries that also have, by and large, similar problems in terms of inequality. India has been addressing this problem more through its minimum employment program by the government, which is another way of dealing with essentially the same problem. Now, this sort of gives us a host of experience to share with other developing countries. And I'm just giving two examples, but there are many more. And through IBSA, we have been able to cooperate directly with other countries of the developing world, such as sometimes very, very, very poor countries like Haiti, for example, or like Guinea-Bissau, or certain projects in Cape Verde or in Palestine and in other countries, where countries that have already attained a certain level of development in terms of devising these solutions to development problems are now able and have the resources to share them with other countries of the developing world. So I think these are the main, I think, novelties that we see in our cooperation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We now go to our viewers. That's a long list of questions, so we'll start with the first one. We have Deepak Gupta, and Deepak says, any ideas on how the exchange rate is going to be in the coming months? Well, this really is a question not really on the bilateral relationship between Brazil and India. We'll go on to the second question. Hemant Amrute, he goes on, he asks, media, entertainment and tourism is an area of interest, but we see no opportunity presented.
Well, media and entertainment, we actually have seen some examples of that, both I think from Indian producers of films that have been shot in Brazilian locations, and of Brazilian television series makers that have in recent years also used India as a main background for stories or for cinema shows. So we do see this happening. It does have an effect on tourism because people see certain landscapes and they're more curious about where that area is, and that this stimulates tourism. It also stimulates one country or people from one country wishing to know more about the other.
Yeah.
And this is good because these are two countries that have relative little knowledge of each other. So these two areas, I think, are already happening, and we can try to give as much stimulus as possible for it to grow.
Excellent. We can shoot a few more Bollywood films in Brazil. What kind of investments fall under social and urban areas in growth acceleration program? This is a question asked by Avik Roy.
Growth acceleration program. Well, we have had a lot of social and urban investment because of the Brazilian emphasis on these types of activities, so as to lift people out of poverty and also increase their purchasing power with a positive effect on the economy, as I commented. Now we have program also not just in terms of cash transfer, but also in terms of making it easier for people to purchase their own house, and this has been helped recently by lower interest rates in Brazil, another one of the effects of the sound macroeconomic situation that we have in Brazil. And also in terms of investments in infrastructure, for example, in water treatment, we also have programs that deal specifically with these issues that have an impact on the social situation of Brazil, and at the same time they generate investment opportunities.
Nilesh has Rajiv from Aptech. What are the measures being taken to promote education investments like ICT or English language or in the aviation sector in view of the overall development and also for the forthcoming world events in Brazil?
Well,
so ICT, English and aviation.
Well, English is actually part of the curriculum, education curriculum in Brazil. That doesn't mean that you will find, as in India, such a wide English-speaking population, but it is part of the curriculum in Brazil. And what we see today, because of the growing interchange of Brazil with the world and with its region, a growing interest not just to learn English, which today is a language that is widely spoken, but also in the case of Brazil, Spanish, because of all the neighboring South and Latin American countries. So we do have, I think, an emphasis on this. Specifically on the aviation sector, we may not have a specific government program on that, but the aviation industry being one of the main technology intensive areas in Brazil, we have that section in Brazilian universities as being also quite developed.
Ambassador, what I'm going to do in view of the paucity of time, I'm going to read out the questions very quickly and we will answer them offline, maybe not immediately, but I will request you to help find answers to these questions later. But just now, would you like to answer any of them? Some of them are common. For example, Nilesh from Duroshocks and Larsen and Toubro, they are talking about. They say, is there some sort of restriction on the import of automotive components into Brazil? And Nilesh wants to know, why are there such high duties on the imports of engineering equipment in Brazil?
Well, yes, I think that
We'll answer that later.
Quite happy with a number of questions and of interest that this has generated. We will gladly take all the questions back and provide specific answers. The one you raised, Larsen and Toubro, it's on the contact details in our embassy to get us inroads with reputed organizations for trade. With regard to wind energy equipment and import of raw materials, yes, I think that we can provide that. We have a trade section at the Brazilian embassy in New Delhi, which is specializes in this type of query. So we can provide more specific answers to what I could provide here. I would say that the benefits of doing trade with Brazil is that you can probably make good business in that. It has a host of areas